Hi, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final in our series of lectures for this Cybersecurity Awareness Month for 2024. I trust you're all doing well, and I thank you all, especially the return visitors who have stayed with us for the month-long activities. We're winding down, and we can't do many things these days without considering the vulnerable among our societies. And one of the most vulnerable groups that we have within our society is that of children, whether it is toddlers, those between the ages of kindergarten and primary school, or those in high school, they are all prized possessions and our primary responsibilities. And so today we have with us a very esteemed Jamaican to discuss the challenges of the advent of screen time and how much we give our children versus traditional parenting. And we call it the Digital Nanny. Miss Diahann Gordon Harrison is our guest today, and she has been the children's advocate for Jamaica since January of 2012. She has also been Jamaica's national rapporteur on the trafficking in persons since March of 2015, making her the first to hold such a position in Latin America and the Caribbean region for this length of time. She's an attorney at law by profession with over 20 years experience and has practiced at the public bar since her graduation from the Norman Manley Law School. Prior to her appointment as children's advocate, Ms. Harrison served as a deputy director of public prosecution within the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Known for her advocacy skills, she states that her current roles provides a national and regional platform from which to promote the rights of children and other people in vulnerable circumstances from a victim-centered and rights-based orientation. She's also passionate about accountability frameworks through which persons who violate the rights of children and vulnerable persons can be held responsible for their actions. Mrs. Gordon Harrison is an associate tutor at the Norman Manley Law School and has been an external reviewer for the British Council in Jamaica and has been designated champion for CARICOM's regional sex guidelines for courts. In November 2019, she was certified as a global expert by the Geneva-based Justice Rapid Response roster of global experts in international criminal law for potential deployment worldwide with a focus on crimes against humanity, war crimes, and international human rights law. Since 2020, she is a serving member of the board of directors for the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, a United States-based nonprofit organization that works in over 200 countries. We are privileged to have you, Mrs. Harrison, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Fernie. Thank you to you and your colleagues for having extended this invitation to me. To say that I am pleased to be here would be an understatement. But I also want to not only thank you for the invitation, but thank you for recognizing Cybersecurity Month through these webinars. And from what I have understood, they have gone quite well and certainly would have helped to build the awareness of Jamaicans about cybersecurity related issues and certainly how different cohorts of our society can take proactive action in terms of maintaining their own protection within cyberspace. So congratulations to you, and of course, kudos to the team. Now, the topic this morning is very grabbing, and I'll read it for those of you who don't have it. It's screen time versus parenting, the digital nanny. Now, I'd like to start off my remarks with you. And in fact, it's a conversation that we're going to be having this lunchtime. And what I want to start off with is just the facts as we all know it. and the environment in which we all live. So many persons would have recognized or would have heard by now that we have had the second industrial revolution in terms of the very vast improvements that have taken place in the evolution of technology, and certainly the various uses that we're able to employ technology into our everyday lives, and really the intensity and the density that technology has managed to penetrate our societies. So it's no longer just a scientist who has access to a computer or, a computer engineer and so on, but all of us of various ages and all across the world have been penetrated by the use of technology. So what does that mean in terms of our environment? First of all, it means that technology is very accessible. It means that the cost has been comparatively reduced as opposed to when technology was first making its entry into society. And it therefore means that all ages have access to technology very easily. Now, the Jamaican society and children within our society are no exception to that particular fact. And of course, when I say a child, I mean anyone under 18 years, which is the legal definition within the Jamaican context. And if you just reflect for a moment, participants, on your own children or children with whom you're familiar, I'm sure you can recall many times children are on a device, whether it is their parents' phone for the younger ones, or their own phones if they're teenagers, or the tablet, because this is now an integrated part of how we all live. And so what we need to recognize, first of all, is that technology can get in the hands of anyone, including our children. Having said that, what we also must recognize is that technology will only get more sophisticated and more advanced. So that means it's here to stay. And so within that reality, what I think we need to be asking ourselves very clearly is how can we help children who we know, who we are associated with, and children at large, even those whom we don't know, to navigate all of these digital platforms safely and responsibly. That has to be the question, because I think we're far beyond the point where we try to bury our heads in the sand to say, oh, we have to keep children off technology. It is here to stay. And it is this kind of thinking which urged the Office of the Children's Advocate in 2016 to embark upon our program called Be Social, Be Smart. And what that program effectively does is it uses child-friendly language to share with children in Jamaica how we have observed that they have been using social media and online platforms. But more importantly, we give them advice as to how to navigate social media very safely and in a responsible way. Of course, we haven't left out the grown-ups in their lives because we recognize that they too have a role to play. And so we have guidelines that have been established for adults, mainly children, mainly parents, and teachers who have to interact with children. And so we recognize that we have to give them the framework, give them the guidance to navigate the space safely. Now, what are some of the positives, though? Why it is we have said that we want to integrate the use of technology in a responsible way. If we reflect, participants, on the COVID-19 pandemic that we were afflicted by, along with the rest of the world, we saw very creative ways in which technology was used and harnessed to affect our productivity and our rates of continuing teaching and learning, and even business. If we didn't have reliable internet, that's when we heard everybody complaining about the unreliability of their internet, because there was this increased reliance that teachers needed access, students needed access so that they could continue to learn. Meetings that needed to take place needed the connectivity. We had important discussions that needed to take place and connectivity was needed. So this, I think, provides a very good example of how social media, online platforms, the internet and digital spaces in general can enhance our productivity. What is also very problematic, however, is that though there are these positives, it can help with research, can help with, getting your classes going and so on, there are the accompanying negatives. And it is this bit of the problem, if you will, that we need to focus on when we're talking about screen time. Is it appropriate? Is it too much? Is it too liberal? Is it too freely accessible? And is it unsupervised? And some of the negatives, certainly from where I sit as children's advocate and national rapporteur on trafficking in persons, are all too obvious. And I'll go into a few of them so that you are very aware of the negatives that impact our children. So first of all, we have predators on various online platforms who seek to exploit our children in a number of different ways. We have seen, for instance, children playing a game, innocent game, and there's a chat room in that game, and they are approached in the chat room by someone who is posing to be a child, but is in fact an adult and a would-be predator. We have seen where they engage those children in very sexually suggestive conversations, and sometimes they get very open. And it's not just conversations, but then they start to share inappropriate pictures of themselves or of body parts to sexualize the child, if you will. We have also seen and have received information directly from children whom we have canvassed that they are sent sometimes messages by persons whom they don't know, and these messages contain sexually explicit photos. And there are conversations that they're exposed to that make them feel very uncomfortable and in fact make them feel almost dirty if some of the language of the students that we interact with, is to be quoted. We have also seen, unfortunately, where we have cases before the courts of sexual grooming, where the predator actually introduced themselves to the child using an online or digital medium. We have seen as well a human trafficking case that made its way before the courts, where again, a child was approached and was having a conversation on and off for over a period of 3 months with an individual whom they had a liking for because the person was very warm, very engaging, was very funny, gave them jokes, made them feel comfortable, and understood everything that the child would speak to them about. It was a teenage girl. She was 15 years at the time. And over time, she now felt that she was really liking this person and this person could be a potential boyfriend. After the period of engagement, they agreed to meet in person, and that is how her human trafficking experience started. It turns out that it wasn't a child of her age. It was, in fact, a grown person who had very, very malicious intentions towards her and really abducted her and embarked on a human trafficking episode in which she was repeatedly sexually exploited. And so the dangers are very real. If we talk about the dangers that do not necessarily affect the individual body, the physical body, we can think about erroneous and fraudulent information that persons try to get from children who are innocent, who are sometimes unsuspecting about different activities, which can morph into fraudulent issues. It may compromise their parents' security because children are oversharing, and it may perhaps even compromise their parents' financial security, and accounts are hacked and so on. So we know that there are negative realities when children are on social media. Another aspect that is negative, which sometimes people don't think about very readily, is the digital footprint that children are creating for themselves. Sometimes unknowingly, because they think that once you press delete, it means that it is gone, not knowing that it is already there for posterity. Also, you may delete it, but not before somebody else has shared it. And so it's always out there. That digital footprint, which is a part of the dialogue that we have with children, follows you. Some time ago, I shared in a presentation I was doing about some students who were admitted to Harvard, which of course is one of the Ivy League universities, very prestigious, and they dreamt of going to Harvard. But the admissions office discovered that when they were in high school, about 4 students or so were involved in cyberbullying, and they bullied and heckled another individual and made that individual very uncomfortable. And even though these students were brilliant, had participated in all the extracurricular activities that they should have participated in to make them attractive candidates for Harvard, after they had been admitted and got their admission letters, Harvard rescinded the acceptance on the basis that these kinds of persons are not people that we want to be a part of the Harvard community. So these broad categories that I've mentioned, I think should exemplify the extent of the harm that students and children can in fact expose themselves to, and also just how negative some of the impact of technology is. So the question, therefore, how do we navigate social media, online platforms, digital technology with children without being overbearing and without using it as a substitute for parenting? The fact of the matter, participants, is that we have to recognize as adults who have a responsibility that our responsibility applies in the real world as well as in the digital, virtual, online world. And what that means is that as parents, we have to be very responsive to the changes in digital technology, and we also have to be very observant. So we now have a much harder job. And when I say we, I mean all well-thinking adults who interact with children. So whether you're a biological parent or not, if it is that you have children over whom you have some amount of responsibility, your task has gotten much more difficult. Because if we thought parenting was hard before, it has now quadrupled. And why is that? First of all, students, persons under 18 are digital natives. They were born singing and becoming accustomed to technology from infancy. And what that means is that many of them are way more sophisticated in manipulating digital platforms and in using devices and in harnessing technology than the adults who are in the space. So automatically that puts adults at a disadvantage and gives them the technical know-how that, we have to play catch up to figure out. That's one. Secondly, because it is such a part of how they operate and how they relate, it is second nature to them. And third, as I said, it is very pervasive, so it's very accessible. Whether or not you give your student or your child a device, they can still access digital platforms through their friends' devices, through platforms at school, through when they visit a library. So the issue is, how do we remain vigilant and how do we ensure that we're parenting and not substituting what should be our responsibility and vesting that in the hands of a screen? We, first of all, have to be very mindful of our children's emotions. When you are exposed too much to screen time, and there are neuroscience studies which speak to this, there can be an almost rewiring of how the brain functions. When you have that heightened expectation that I touch a button and things happen, instantly, or I swipe a screen and I see what's behind the next screen. If you are exposed to that, consistently and for very long periods of time as a child, it's creating almost a false expectation that this is how the real world operates. This means that they are becoming more impatient, because they don't understand the process and that things take time and that for every action, there's a reaction that's not necessarily instant. They don't appreciate as well the discipline of sitting through, for example, an English literature class, reading the text, identifying the theme, coming back to understand who the characters are, and then going ahead to portray that information in the form of an essay, because that just takes way too long. That's not an instant world, which is what they have been socialized if they are left unsupervised on the screen as being normal. So that also puts them at a disadvantage academically. What also happens as well is they sometimes become very irritable. If you recognize, for instance, that a child has had way too much screen time and you want to, scroll back a bit and pull them back, if you take that device, you recognize that you almost are seen by that child as public enemy number one. They become miserable, they become irritable, they start to cry, and they literally do not know how to function. How many of you have heard a child say, "But I have nothing to do. You've taken my iPad." Nobody thinks about, I can read a book. Nobody thinks about, I can go outside and I can play with my friends, or I can skip, or I can go ahead and work on that art project that I always wanted to try. And it's because they have become so dependent on the screen. So what that tells us as parents is that we cannot usurp our own authority as parents and substitute a screen for it. The digital nanny is not equal to the physical nanny, to the physical parent, to the physical caregiver who really has a responsibility to pay attention to the needs of the child, to engage the child, to ensure that you're not just say, "I'm busy, I'm tired, take the iPad and go." Because when you do that, it means you're substituting the people interface for a screen interface. And though there are positives, which we do accept, we have to recognize that there are negatives that continue to create real havoc if they go unsupervised. So what should we do? First of all, we have to be in tune with the fact that children, let's deal with the younger ones now, say under 12, they depend on the adults in their space to create the environment. What will our environment look like? Will we be a nurturing and enabling adult that creates activities for children to do, that creates boundaries as well? So a child knows, yes, I can have some screen time, but that comes after homework and after I've read a little bit and after I've gone outside and played a little bit. Yes, I'm tired when I come home from work as the adult. What does that mean? Because I'm tired, I substitute me, the person, with a device? The answer to that has to be no, because particularly when you're dealing with younger children, you find that if they're exposed to very long periods of screen time, it has all of these negative effects, which will eventually affect their ability to learn. It also affects their social skills because they're more comfortable with a screen instead of human interface. And so they can't conduct very simple social transactions. When somebody tells them good morning, for instance, they get very withdrawn. When somebody asks them, what do you think about so-and-so? They can't express themselves because they're not used to conversation. If we look at the teenage cohort, again, if we give them unbridled access, this is where sometimes the mantra that the devil finds work for idle hands becomes very real. During the stage of adolescence, we all know or should know that there is a great amount of emotional and mental agility. And that's me trying to be diplomatic, because the hormones are flying. People are sending them all sorts of things online. They're reacting to it. They're interpreting it without necessarily getting the feedback and guidance from the adult in their space, because that adult has almost divorced themselves from that supervisory role. You have your iPad, you have your phone, you're good. Call me if you need me. If we adopt that attitude as an adult, as a parent, as somebody, whom a teenager is looking to for guidance, we have almost given them the go-ahead to use social media and the digital platforms and the various things they're seeing on TikTok, the interpretations that they're getting about what sex is, the messaging that's coming to them about how they should dress, about what's appropriate, what they should smoke, what they should be drinking. It means that we have usurped our own function and the screen is now being the parent. This can never be a good thing, because if our teenagers who are naturally curious and in a stage where they want to explore don't have that person who can guide them, who can explain things, who can lead by example, it means that they're going to be not only looking to, but getting their answers from the digital nanny, which cannot and can never replace the human interface. So again, we need to recognize as parents, as adults in their space, that we have to be very in tune with what is happening. The Office of the Children's Advocate operates a 24-hour child and teen helpline called Safe Spot. And what I can tell you categorically is that we see children, because of what they tell us, having uncomfortable experiences online. And because they feel that it is a taboo topic with their parents, or it is a topic that we don't think that we have this space that we can even ask our parents or our aunt or our grandmother for clarification, they go off feeling dejected, feeling concerned, feeling uncomfortable, and then turn right back to the screen for guidance. And then that leads to compounded problems. We see them coming to us with body image concerns, people who are having eating disorders because they're trying to look a certain way because this is how social media tells them they should look. People who are having suicidal ideations because of anxiety, because of, all of these things that are coming at them, and they don't have the avenue through which to seek any kind of clarification. And so the short position that I'm trying to urge you to take is that while the digital platforms may be useful for some purposes, we cannot fully substitute them for us as people, as the persons who provide that supervision for students, for those who we rear and care for, and those who are in our immediate spaces. So we need to recognize that this issue of keeping children safe in cyberspace is important, and it is something that, if we don't take it seriously, could lead to a number of other issues. Now, the issue and the art of conversation is therefore very important. This is a part of how you create a nurturing and enabling space. You don't talk about everything with every child of every age, but what we encourage is what we call age-appropriate conversation, which sets the tone and has your child or children with whom you interact understanding that, you know what, I think if I have a problem, she seems approachable enough. Or I think if I have a problem, I can speak to her about it or him about it, because they will tell me as it is, yes, but then give me some guidance. That's a big part of the solution that we want, if we want to ensure that we're having human nannies and not digital nannies. It's very important because it gives children who are in your sphere a sense that what they feel and what they think is important. It gives them self-validation, and it makes them come to you. Even if they go to social media and see it, they will double check with you. And this is what you want, because what you want to do is to put yourself in the front row seat of being very observant, to notice when the child seems a little bit despondent, a little bit withdrawn, the emotions seem to be spiking and, dipping and peaking and spiking, because sometimes that's how you know when something is going wrong. And if you know something is going wrong, even if you don't know what it is, it makes you more in tune with observing, seeing, and even giving advice, even though it may be unsolicited. And this goes a far way now in creating that safe space for your child and for your teen. And so what we encourage at the Office of the Children's Advocate is that we don't deny them technology because they're going to find it anyway, but we don't give them unbridled access, and that we're checking in. When your child is watching the iPad as a youngster, you go and you sit and you watch with them, feel comfortable with them in their space, and make them feel comfortable with you popping in unannounced at different times, because this is what we do. We are normalizing the use of technology for appropriate reasons, so that when you go to watch, you're not hiding and you can't see what's on the screen. That's a telltale sign that they're probably doing something that's inappropriate, or seeing something that's inappropriate, or hearing things that are inappropriate, or they are getting uncomfortable with you in their space. So sometimes they're not doing anything that's inappropriate, but they see and associate screen time with being their individual time. And so they feel uncomfortable when somebody comes around. That's never a good thing, because it means that the digital nanny is taking over and has a couple more points than the human nanny or the human parent who is in that child's space. In the same way, for the older ones, encourage them to talk about things that they're seeing. Sometimes, you're on social media too, you may see something and you should share it with them. Did you see so and so and so? And sometimes they feel very uncomfortable and very shocked that you have said it, but it is a way to communicate to them to say, hey, I'm seeing it too. And if I'm seeing it, it means you're seeing it. Let's talk about it and let's put it in context. And I can't stress how important this is if we're going to normalize responsible, respectful, and appropriate behavior on digital platforms. And so as I close, what I urge is that all participants who are here leave with the following takeaways. Technology is here to stay. Technology has positives. Technology has negatives. As parents, we need to manage the negatives by, first of all, becoming aware of what they are and seeing how we can have age-appropriate discussions with our children and teens to be aware that these negatives exist and what to do if it is that they find themselves in an uncomfortable situation. We also have to remember that though our lives take on quite a bit of activity, though we're frustrated sometimes as adults, we're extremely tired at the end of the workday, on the weekend we just want our we time, we have to recognize that our most important job is being a parent. It beats any job that you have any paper qualifications for. And it therefore means that because your job as a parent is to raise a child who is socially adjusted and can eventually contribute to Jamaica's development and function properly, it means that we have to take the time to invest in that child, good values, good morals, understanding him or herself within the context of society, and being there as the sounding board, the protector, the guider, and the one who ensures that they are not getting any inappropriate information or any information that they get that they can't verify. So the people that continue to have superiority as far as I'm submitting to you as parents are us, the human beings, not the digital space, as tempting as that may be. So while we all do it sometimes, you just need a moment, you just need to make a call and you're going to put them on the iPad. That shouldn't last for 4 hours or an hour. It should be interrupted with, okay, now that you've watched your show, what are we going to do? So always remember that despite the temptation of yielding to the digital spaces to parent for us, if we are going to be true to our responsibility as parents that need to groom, guide, protect, and secure the future of the children with whom we are entrusted, we have to recognize that our human parenting trumps screen time. every time. With that, I close and I'm open to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gordon Harrison. I believe that was more than food for thought. That was more like a buffet of things for all of us who are adults who have interactions with children need to take on board and really try to ensure that our interactions with these young minds are the most positive that we can make them, because tomorrow they're the ones who are going to have to take care of us. The floor is open for questions, and if you have none, I have more than enough for Mrs. Gordon Harrison, so I will yield to you and see where it is. Just indicate by raising your hand or typing in the chat, and we will ensure the question gets asked and answered.
Hello.
Go ahead with your question, sir.
Uh, um, Thank you. Lovely presentation so far. My question is, if your child is already seem to be addicted to this digital nanny, are there steps or a procedure that you recommend in assist in curbing that addiction, other than cold blood, just removing it totally?
Yes, right. So in those instances, I think a gradual approach is always preferred because an addict is an addict, whether to the screen, whether to cocaine, whether to marijuana. And when you do a cold turkey, there is a psychological response that sometimes comes with violence and defiance of some sort. So my advice is always to make it gradual, but it always has to start with a conversation. So, for example, you recognize that a child, say the child is Sally, has an issue. You have to call Sally and you have to sit with Sally and you have to say, boy, Sally, I noticed that you're almost a different child when you are on the screen versus when you're at the dinner table with us as a family. When you're at the dinner table, you're anxious to get up, you cannot wait to go back to the screen. And in fact, sometimes you take the screen to the dinner table. That's not normal. And then you start to explain why it's not normal. And then you could perhaps say, I think you're actually addicted or you're spending way too much time. So as the parent, you may not like me for this, but my responsibility is to regulate your exposure to screen time. And so I'm going to take a little bit more active interest in this, and we're going to come to an agreement. And you tell me what you think about the agreement. And so you can engage in a conversation to say, all right, instead of coming home, and as you get home, you're on that tablet and homework hasn't even been done. Let us start with some basics. Let's deal with the priorities first. So you understand when you come home, you have your bath, you do your homework, you have your dinner, or you have your dinner and then you do your homework. After we look over it and talk about it, if everything is as it should be, I'll give you a little hour so you can watch two of your favorite shows, something like that. Or you may not have the child watching shows, but you can say, you're addicted, but this is how we're going to divide it. You choose one thing you want to watch. Of course, I have to see it and I have to know that it's okay. And then I will choose something you can do. And then you take the child perhaps to one of those online apps that have great activities that are educational. So you start splitting it up and brokering. And then, of course, it's always a good idea to come up with alternative activities because you're going to get the, what am I to do now? You have taken the iPad. So never take it without thinking ahead of time of a replacement. So what's an age-appropriate activity that you can do? Can we play a game of cards? Do you have a board game that you like to play? Do you want to go outside and we play hide and seek? You know, it could be a 3-year-old, they get very excited about those things. So you always do it gradually. That's the first thing. And then you think of alternatives as to how you're going to occupy the child's time. And you can think of a reward and incentive kind of scale to help the child navigate. Even though they may not like you and they be grumpy, you will see the gradual improvement in their personality and their attitude. I hope that helps you, Doreen.
Thank you. It does. Because I tried it with my teenage daughter, and yeah, I'm really the bad guy right about now. So I was thinking of different ways of navigating that. And well, she's not a teenager. She thinks she's a teenager, 12 going to 13.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're gonna be the bad guy for a little bit, Daddy, but guess what?
Gotcha.
She'll get over it. And at some point, when she starts observing younger children in her space, she's going to start saying, why are you on the iPad so long? You don't see I'm trying to talk to you and I can't get your attention. And whenever you hear her, I would love for you to say, but that's the same thing I'm saying to you, you know? So she won't love you right now in the moment for doing this, but she'll respect you and she'll understand eventually that you just had to step in and take things in hand for her own good.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, Mrs. Gordon Harrison, we have a question in the chat. What is the recommended age to introduce technology of which we speak to your child?
Oh boy, that's a very touchy one. And the science is very conflicted on this. Some people think that a child shouldn't even be on a device until they're probably 5, 6. And even then, it should be for very short periods of time and monitored, and it should be for certain types of activity. So, like activities that have, songs about the alphabet and interactive stuff that gets them moving. So they're not just doing this, right? So it's I don't think there is a set recommended age, but the general rule of thumb is that if you find yourself, having your child play on your phone or the child has a tablet or so on, the importance of regulating the exposure cannot be overemphasized in terms of the length of time and in terms of what it is they're seeing on those screens. The younger the child, the better that the activities involve some kind of engagement, so like those little Blues Clues and, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and so on, that has the child watching, but still using the brain to process things. So when you see, where is the cart around the corner? And they have to guess, and you see the little things come up on the screen, they always recommend that it is something that is interactive and pulls the child out instead of just that numbing of staring on the screen and being completely lost. So I can't give a specific age per se, but just to watch the length of exposure and the type of content that the child is exposed to.
Thank you for that. I hope it answers your question, the Harrell. There is another in the chat. Do you have any recommendations for educational apps for toddlers?
I know that there is one that is very good, starfall.com. That one teaches a lot through games and through music. And again, certainly from what I understand about the development of a child's brain, they like, engaging catchy phrases and songs. And especially if the music is very melodious and happy and so on, they tend to learn the songs. And sometimes they're spelling very big words because it's put in a song. So starfall.com comes to mind very readily. I will also direct you to the website of the Office of the Children's Advocate, where we have created 2 mascots that speak about online safety and responsibility. They're Sam Social and Sally Social. And we actually have social media guides under our Be Social, Be Smart banner that talks about very helpful tips for the younger children under 12 and for teens 13 to 17. So I encourage you to have a look at that because you will find some resources that may be very useful to you.
Thank you for that response. I hope that answers your question, Odette. Is there any other question for Mrs. Harrison? All right, so ma'am, while they build up the courage I have a couple I will fill the gap with.
Sure.
How would you recommend to parents to, or what would you recommend to parents to get them to have the children themselves help in finding ways to regulate their screen time without constant supervision?
I think a reward and incentive approach works very well. Children, most of them are very competitive in nature, which is why when you're playing a game and they lose, what's the first thing they do? Cry, right? Or some of them take it to the extreme and they storm off and they don't want to play anymore. If they run a race and they don't come first or second, or even if they come second, some of them are very upset. So naturally, children tend to be very competitive. And so I find that a framework that encourages an incentive if they do certain things, or if they even come up with an idea better than mommy or better than daddy, they'll get a little treat. I find that that gets them excited about inventing ideas about how to self-regulate. And also it gives them the motivation to get on with it and to ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so I like the incentive and reward system whereby they know if you can come up with 2 ideas this week about not having mommy or daddy on your back about, oh, you're spending too much time, and share those ideas with me and they're good. At the end of the week, we're going to go to Devon House. Or at the end of the week, I'll write it down in a little book. You earn a star. And so that means when we're looking at your stars at Christmas, that is going to help to determine what kind of gift you're getting this Christmas. Or you can choose, for example, where we go as a family for an outing, because even though we think that the screen is taking over, it really truly has not erased the natural excitement and the basic makeup of a child, which is one, to be seen by the adults in their space, to be recognized, to be loved, and to be made the center of attention. So if we do that in a creative way, I think that goes a very long way in encouraging them to contribute to the plan.
Thank you very much for your response. We have another question in the chat. What role should screen time play in a child's daily routine to ensure they're building essential social skills for future interactions?
Okay, so if I'm reading that correctly, I would say that social media and screen time doesn't necessarily have to be involved in a child's life every day. In fact, I think it's good when they have days when they're not having screen time, where they're not playing on the screen. Because for me, the best social skills interaction that we can give our children is when we talk to them, when we teach them the art of conversation, when we teach them the art of negotiation and bargaining and, actions and consequences, good graces, manners, kindness. For me, that comes best from a human being as opposed to a screen. So I think, in my own perspective, if you can have days in the week when your child is not having screen time, those are the best days and a part of what I think is a very good formula of having them recognize the beauty of connecting with people without having the world pass you by and missing the opportunity of social interactions in the real world because your head is down. So for me, I think we, the human beings, are the ones that are the best placed to teach social skills and interaction, because sometimes when the child becomes too dependent on hearing it from an inanimate screen that can't respond to anything they say, the art of conversation is being stifled because you can't talk back at the screen for the screen to respond to you. And so when you don't understand the yin and yang of a conversation, you say something, somebody else says something, you have to feed off that and respond, it actually debilitates aspects of the social development skills if you leave it in the hands of a screen.
Thank you very much for that. Dwayne, I hope that answered your question. is there an app you can download on your child's iPad so you can monitor what they do on their iPad?
Absolutely. There are tons of them. And again, we have taken the liberty to list a few of those options in the Be Social, Be Smart guides. I don't have them to hand now, and I don't want to mislead you, but I do know that there are so many apps. If you Google, for example, or go in the App Store and Google, parent supervision apps, you'll see a number of them that come up. It's for you to look at them to see which one suits you, whether it's Android or Apple. And, if some of them are free, because there are free software that do this, but then there's also more sophisticated ones that can even mirror your child's screen. You can see who's calling them, what their messages are, and so on. I know Apple makes it very easy because once you share your Apple ID with your child, it means that anybody who calls them, texts them, sends them a photo, whether on Snap or WhatsApp, you're seeing that. But they keep changing and keep updating them. But a good place to start would be through the Google search, or as I said, reference the Be Social, Be Smart manuals on the OCA's website and look at the one that is for parents, because there are 3 different manuals we have: one for below 12, one for teens, and one for adults.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Paulette. Any more questions for Mrs. Harrison? I realize persons have taken a liking to the chat. I don't know if they're unwilling to speak. Maybe this is a symptom of the screen time for parents as well. Oh, we have one hand going up. Kadia, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. No, not a question. Just wanted to reiterate that Mrs. Gordon Harrison, I think it was an excellent presentation. And just sitting and listening to just the little tips that you have, I feel like there is so much more need for these kinds of conversations, certainly within the context of parents. Sometimes I know feeling overwhelmed and feeling like it's easier. I just need a breather. And also sometimes an inability, or just not knowing sometimes what to do to keep their children entertained, or so on. The other thing that I would add is something, and I'm speaking both from the angle of a parent and a school administrator, but what I try to do with one of my sons is when you talked about the conversations, letting him understand why it is we regulate some of the things that he can watch. So we have discussions around that because we understand the more they appreciate the rationale behind the decisions, I find that it becomes a little easier to regulate the time. And then I time him. So he has a watch on and he knows if it is X time, I say, hello, what time is it? And he says, oh, so on and so forth. But I really just wanted to thank you for the clarity of your presentation and the strategies that you shared with us today.
You're so welcome, Kadia. And I think, you have hit the nail on the head. Dialogue is so important because it creates the why. So we're telling them to do X, but we're giving a context. And I think your approach certainly illustrates how we have evolved as parents. We are a little beyond the do it because I say so kind of approach. And there's good reason for that, because children, as simple as we take it, they're human beings. They have a brain, they have feelings, and they understand stuff. And when you can get them to understand the why, you're building more self-reliance in terms of being compliant with a process. So they understand why they're to do it, and then they understand the consequences if they don't do it. So I really want to commend you for that intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hilton Fraser. There is a question, a very interesting question. We have talked about children who have access to technology. but though in the minority, there are children without. Is there any research to show the difference in impact in terms of creative or cognitive development for both? And I would add, are there suggestions for the socialization of those who don't have organic technology in their homes on how to give them access in a responsible way?
Mhm. All right, so there have been some studies that have been done that have analyzed more behavioral responses in children who are really exposed and have a lot of screen time versus when they are not so exposed. And the general observations is that children who are always exposed tend to be more impatient in real life. And as I said early in my presentation, that's because they think that life revolves and happens at the slide of a screen or the click of a button. They are so used to that that when they go to a restaurant, for example, and food is ordered and it's taking a while, within the first 2 minutes, they're annoyed because the food is not yet here. When they are moving from one classroom to the other, they're very annoyed that they can't snap their finger and then they're in that new classroom. So they tend to be more impatient when you take them off the screen and they now have to navigate regular social interaction. We find as well that sometimes their communication skills are hampered because they're not reading, they're not developing their language, whether it is Spanish or English or French. So they're not able to communicate as fluently as a child who perhaps is not on the screen and is really an avid reader, or one who is having conversations with the adults in their space or other children and talking about real world problems and just solving little things. Why did the ball go down the hill so fast? Exploring and developing that side of the brain that engages with things. So you find that their ability to reason and to communicate effectively is a little bit hampered. I know as well from the context of schools, teachers can tell when a child sits down to write an essay. Those who are so used to the screen and sending those abbreviated words in WhatsApp, because it's coming through, for example, in their essays. Instead of writing, to be honest, they write TBH, and the slang is morphing and making its way into the formal setting. So I do know that there are those studies, and there's also some indication that there's a level of hyperactivity and almost akin to ADHD diagnosis to children who have very high screen times, because again, the part of the brain that responds to impulses and so on and so forth is so oversensitized to the neglect of other bits of the brain that they're saying that it can be seen as, affecting the cognitive development in some aspects, if there's this extreme exposure to the screen. So I hope that does help.
Thank you. And we can't overemphasize the finding of balance. Ladies and gentlemen, we could keep Mrs. Harrison here all day and we would not get bored. But I stole your time in the middle of the day, and I really must give you back to your employers or your endeavors if you're self-employed. Mrs. Harrison, your final thoughts as we wrap this very interesting expose on how we integrate a balanced diet of screen and parenting into our children's lives.
All right, the balanced diet always has to be that we recognize our role as parents. And while we all have gadgets, most of us and our children have access to them, we have to ensure that we continue to weigh the scales, if you will, and ensure that we're not abdicating our physical and human responsibility to a screen. I think that moderation is key, as well as the content and the type of material in terms of age appropriateness, and certainly the frequency with which we give unsupervised access is very, very important in terms of weighing the balance. Of course, as I close as well, I cannot help but shout out the fellow Mac girl who is on the screen. I saw your message, Mrs. Hilton Fraser. Indeed, I'm an Immaculate Conception alum, and I think that's a very high and appropriate point on which to end the presentation, as well as to thank you for the opportunity. I
As
think you're
we,
muted, yes.
right, we can't do it without you. And as we at the CERT always tell persons, you know, cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. The challenge that we face oftentimes when we monitor our feeds and sensors is that children feature a lot in some of those videos with very antisocial behavior in cyberspace. Some of it coming from physical interactions that spill over into the digital space. And so it is imperative that as we move forward, we take that into account, appreciating some of the challenges that parents and caregivers have, but notwithstanding, if we all pull together, we can build resilience within our cyberspace for our more vulnerable. Mrs. Gordon Harrison, it has been a pleasure having you today, and certainly we can't say thank you enough for the work you do outside of screen time here with us today in terms of just protecting our children. We wish you every success, and we hope you come back with us next year and throughout the year, because we do this throughout the year. It's just that we amplify what we do in October each year. We invite everyone on the call to join us tomorrow as we look at ransomware, which is really an existential issue for us locally and regionally, and to come out and join us for the final day, our Cybersecurity Awareness Day on Thursday at the Caribbean Military Academy in Upper Camp, where we will have more prizes, surprises, and lots of information for you all. Thank you very much, ma'am. And to all of those who are on the call, thank you. What good.